Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Sarah Douglas. Sarah Douglas was born in 1987 in Sacramento, California, into a family of 5 siblings. They always get along and help each other. From an early age, her parents commented that she was a girl with a gentle and cheerful personality. However, during her teenage years, her personality changed significantly. She started associating with a group of troubled teens and to spend all her free time with them. As a result, she quickly dropped out of school. At the age of 19, Sarah started dating a boyfriend named Nicholas. In 2007, when she was 20, she became pregnant. By this time, her relationship with Nicholas was deteriorating, and they often fought over minor issues. The arrival of their child only increased the conflict between them, causing them to decide to separate. Nicholas moved to Santa Rosa, a city 150 kilometers away, where he began a new life with another woman. Despite being separated, he still cares for their son, and the two share custody. Sarah found herself in a challenging situation. As a young single mother, with a young child to care for, and education level is not high, she had difficulty making ends meet. Her parents were busy raising their own younger children and couldn't offer her much support. Although her mother and sister helped whenever they could, it still wasn't enough financially. She needed to find a way to earn money. Eventually, Sarah decided to work as an escort, drawn in by the good pay and flexible hours. She has an attractive appearance and quickly became famous in this industry, helping her earn a good income. However, she did not know much about the risks involved in this profession. After a few years as a call girl, she met Orville Fleming, a man who gave her the stability and security she had always craved. She hopes to quit her current job, find a husband, as well as a father for her son, and finally get her life on track. She believes so blindly in her dream that she does not notice the dangers around her. Orville Fleming was born in 1958 in California. Before he met Sarah, he was a happy husband and father. He dedicated over 30 years to his career as a fire chief, earning the respect of his community. He served for 24 years, including 3 years in Modesto. In 1993, he became a fire engineer with the California Department of Forestry. Thanks to his excellent performance, he was promoted to captain and became a battalion chief in 2012. Throughout his career, Orville built an impressive resume and reputation. He also worked part-time as an instructor at a fire academy, where he shared his valuable experience and trained future firefighters. Through hard work, he earned about $130,000 a year, enough to enjoy a wealthy lifestyle. When his children were grown, he and his wife could enjoy a comfortable life and their own pleasures. However, beneath the facade of this seemingly happy family lay a troubling secret about Orville. He spent most of his money on encounters with young escorts, as he found family life dull and craved excitement with attractive young women. He met these women through dating sites and escort services, and that led him to Sarah, a 20-year-old girl, 30 years younger than him. In his intimate relationships with these young girls, he sought the variety that was missing from his long-term marriage. His wife is a discreet woman, so he often turns to call girls to satisfy his private needs. After meeting the beautiful Sarah online, Orville began dating her regularly. She charges $300 an hour for each meeting. He became very fond of her, and their encounters began to occur more frequently. She opened up to him about her struggles, earning Orville's sympathy, which gradually evolved into love. He loved Sarah so much that he decided to divorce his wife to start a new life with her, and she agreed. Orville decided to take action immediately. He soon had a conversation with his wife, leading him to leave her and their 2 children to be with his mistress, Sarah. he purchased a house in a quiet suburb near Sacramento. Sarah joyfully shared the news with her family, believing that her life would improve and that she could finally create a stable family. She promised Orville that she would quit the escort service and never return to that line of work. Everything seemed to be going well. However, Sarah's family was concerned about the age difference between her and her boyfriend. She was only 24 years old, while her boyfriend Orville was 54 years old enough to be her father. However, he seemed to be a thoughtful family man, which helped ease their worries. They saw this as a happy time in Sarah's life and supported her, not wanting to affect her happiness. At the start of their life together, everything seemed perfect and joyful. Orville tries to arrange the house so that Sarah and her son feel as comfortable as possible. She gave up her job as a call girl and started a normal life, becoming a housewife. Their life felt like a fairy tale, a perfect home, and a loving relationship. Sarah wishes to have a closer relationship, and she also wants to marry Orville. Her dreams seemed to come true when Orville presented her with an expensive engagement ring, adorned with a large diamond. She accepted his proposal, but her happiness was short-lived. Orville turned out to be very jealous and controlling. He was possessive and wanted to monitor her every move, making her report on everything she did. He realized that she was financially dependent on him, and he used that to control her life, making her completely attached to him. The relationship lasted several years until Sarah grew impatient. Orville exhibits obsessive behavior and wants to control the people she interacts with, even in public. This led to suspicions and arguments between them. Additionally, conflicts arose with Orville's wife, Megan, who was still legally married to him. He filed for divorce, but the process took a long time, giving her more time to pressure him over financial matters. By early 2014, the situation had become very tense. Megan frequently calls Orville to ask him to pay off his debt and give her more money. She was particularly upset about the large sums he spent on call girl service, which often left Sarah in tears. At this point, Sarah and Orville's relationship had significantly deteriorated. She began spending more time with her mother and sister, and during one conversation, she admitted that she wanted to end the relationship due to the mounting problems. Sarah realized that continuing the relationship was a mistake. However, she did not think that her decision to leave him could lead to serious consequences. On Wednesday, April 30, 2014, Sarah's day started like any other. She sent her son to visit his biological father for a few days and planned a vacation with her mother and sister. They first went to a casino where they enjoyed themselves until 11 p.m. During that time, Orville kept calling and texting her, but she chose not to respond. He was upset that she ignored his request not to have fun while he was away. As midnight approached, Stephanie, Sarah's sister, took her back to the house she shared with Orville, and they said their goodbyes. Once inside the house, Sarah immediately noticed a strong smell of gas. She went to the kitchen and saw that the gas burners left on. Alarmed, she called her sister Stephanie to let her know that Orville had neglected to turn off the gas. It was obvious he wanted to poison her. Suddenly, a scream was heard, startling she. Orville had unexpectedly shown up, disrupt her and Stephanie's phone call. Then, all Stephanie could hear was her terrified screams. Assuming it was just another argument between lovers, Stephanie decided to hang up and go to bed. Early in the morning, Stephanie decided to call Sarah to find out what had happened the previous night. She dialed Sarah's number, but was surprised when there was no answer, as Sarah usually stayed in touch. As anxiety grew over Sarah's lack of response, she and her aunt went to Sarah's house around 8 a.m. to check. They rang the doorbell and knocked for a long time, but no one answered. Just as they were about to leave, her aunt tried the door handle, and to their surprise, the door opened. This was unusual behavior, which made them even more worried. but they decided to go inside. Once inside, they found the living room in disarray, with furniture out of place and items scattered everywhere. They cautiously made their way to the bedroom, hoping to find Sarah. At that moment, a neighbor heard them screaming from the window. He saw them running out of Sarah's house, clearly terrified. When he asked what was wrong, they told him there was a human body inside the house. The neighbor immediately called 911 to report the situation. By 9 a.m., officers were on the scene. Several officers worked together to calm and interview the witness. In the bedroom, the officers discovered clear evidence of a struggle. A young woman lay face down on the floor, showing no signs of life. She had injuries on her body and neck, including cuts and a sheet tied around her throat. Blood was splattered on the bed and walls. In the bathroom, they found a bloody towel thrown into the washing machine. All the windows were tightly closed. They quickly secured the crime scene and started their investigation. Forensic experts arrived to gather evidence, and the body was taken to the morgue for an autopsy to determine the cause of death. The witnesses identified Sarah Douglas, who was 26 years old when she died. The autopsy revealed that she suffered at least 14 stab and cut wounds, likely inflicted with a kitchen knife. There were also signs of suffocation on her neck, which was determined to be the cause of death. Forensic experts discovered multiple bruises and evidence of beatings on her body, indicating she had fought back fiercely. Blood tests showed that at the time of her death, she was neither drunk nor under the influence of drugs. Sarah's aunt and sister informed detectives that she had previously worked as a call girl, but quit after meeting Orville. Despite their age difference, she believed he was a good man who could help her build a better life. However, their relationship had become strained in recent months, and she had decided to end things with him. Additionally, Sarah's sister Stephanie informed detectives about everything she heard on her cell phone the night before. It was likely that Orville attacked Sarah and killed her out of jealousy. As a result, he became the primary suspect in the brutal murder, and a warrant was issued for his arrest. Despite their best efforts to search for him, they still couldn't find him. He was not at home, at work, with his ex-wife Megan, or with his relatives. He had gone into hiding, prompting the police to place him on a statewide wanted list. Just a day after the search began, Orville's official car was found abandoned near a house, but there was no sign of him being there, nor any clues as to where he might have gone. Police have gathered detailed information about Orville and issued a wanted poster stating that he is a particularly dangerous criminal. The database indicated that he owned 2 pistols, but they were not found in his car or at the murder scene. It is believed he was carrying them and may resist arrest. Citizens were alerted to stay vigilant and report any suspicious individuals, while also being advised to exercise caution and avoid confrontations with Orville, who may be armed and very dangerous. The search operation lasted over 2 days. During this time, family and friends gathered near Sarah's home, closely following the search and hoping for any news. They came to honor her memory as a victim of domestic violence. The media also took a keen interest in the case, tracking the police investigation closely. Orville's colleagues were equally shocked by the incident. They knew him as a kind, positive person and a professional with a stellar reputation who had consistently demonstrated his integrity on the job. However, it is worrying that he disappears soon after the death of his young lover Sarah, raising suspicions about his involvement. 5 days later, Orville was fired from his position as head of the fire department because he failed to report to work without any explanation. Given the circumstances, this was merely a bureaucratic formality. Meanwhile, the search is being extended to areas where he may be hiding. He is experienced in outdoor activities and regularly participates in challenging hikes. His endurance and survival skills are evident in extreme conditions. He is known for training in remote wilderness areas for for long periods of time that few people know about. Even though there is a lot of information surrounding the case, the situation seems to be becoming more tense. Orville's wife, Megan, decided to make the situation more serious. She claimed that he and other members of the California Fire Brigade often invited escorts to the fire station for entertainment. Megan said she had seen videos showing these women arriving at the fire station and having fun inside the fire trucks. She also mentioned that a woman named Sarah had been present on a couple of occasions. The police received information regarding the situation and visited the fire station to speak with the employees and verify the details. However, they were unable to locate any video recordings or photographs that Megan had mentioned. Megan could not provide this evidence either, leaving the rumors unconfirmed. In addition, Megan also said that during the time Orville was having an affair with Sarah, he had run up a large debt due to his addiction to prostitutes. She asked him to pay the debt, but he never did. She also mentioned a diamond engagement ring that she suspected was fake. She also convinced the police that Sarah, Orville's mistress, had been stalking her, alleging that Sarah frequently called and threatened her. As a result, she sought a restraining order against Sarah, but this claim could not be substantiated as there was no evidence of harassment. It appeared that she may have fabricated these accusations to further tarnish Sarah's reputation in the eyes of the public. After 2 weeks of thorough investigation, the court denied Megan's request for divorce. On May 26, 2014, Orville was finally captured at a bus stop near where his official car was found. He had been hiding in the forest, but was spotted when he ventured out to buy food, despite having shaved his mustache and attempted to disguise himself. He was taken into custody without issue. He did not have a gun and surrendered to police. After his arrest, he needed special supervision. On May 20, 2014, Orville appeared in court. He claimed he could not afford a lawyer, but maintained his innocence. 10 days after the initial hearing, the city's road patrol began a new investigation into illegal activities involving members of the fire department where Orville worked. By October 2014, after the hearing had officially lasted more than a month, Orville formally pleaded not guilty. Sarah's family was shocked by Orville's arrogance, especially when he winked at the public defender. The prosecution detailed the troubled relationship between Sarah and he. He is portrayed as a jealous man who wants complete control over Sarah's life. He prohibited her from working, took away her personal bank account and mobile phone, and restricted her from using her own vehicle. Meanwhile, an investigation is underway into misconduct at the fire department where Orville worked. On December 29, 2014, the investigation confirmed that there was inappropriate sexual behavior between firefighters after hours. Although the video recordings mentioned by Megan were never located, but the investigation led to 16 firefighters being placed on administrative leave. In June 2015, the Orville trial entered its final stages. The defense presented defendant Orville in a favorable light, arguing that he was a victim influenced by Sarah, a prostitute with drug and alcohol problems. They argued that he was exploited and pointed out that he did not recall the argument with Sarah. This strategy was intended to help reduce the charges against him. As part of this strategy, the defense also sought to discredit Sarah. On the night of the incident, a violent argument erupted, which was overheard by her older sister, Stephanie. However, Orville described experiencing a dissociative state, likening it to being a zombie, as he went to the kitchen to get a knife. He then returned to the bedroom and stabbed Sarah multiple times. Next, he began strangling her until she showed no signs of life. He maintained that he could not remember the details, stating that the incident played out in his mind like disjointed fragments. Orville attempted to sway the jury by expressing deep remorse for his actions. The prosecution aimed to demonstrate that he was not telling the truth. They presented recorded interrogations, where his statements contradicted his testimony during the trial. This discrepancy damaged his credibility and led the court to pursue a first-degree murder charge. On June 24, 2015, just 2 days after the debate ended and just before his birthday, Orville Fleming was charged with second-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison. Sarah's death had a devastating impact, not only on her, but also on those around her. A few months later, her brother Leroy, who was very close to her, died, unable to cope with the grief of losing his younger sister. Hello, crime enthusiasts, are you ready for another chilling investigation? The case of Nancy DePriest. In February 1998, a visitor arrived at the office of the current governor of Texas. The visitor was a criminal who wanted to confess and cleanse his soul. He began writing letters to the police and the prosecutor's office, attempting to reach out to them for 2 years starting in 1996, but all his attempts were ignored. Eventually, he decided to write directly to the governor. In his letter, he confessed to a crime far more serious than robbery or rape. Over 4 pages, he detailed the murder of a girl named Nancy DePriest, which he had committed in 1988. He urged the governor to take his confession seriously, stating that he had become religious and wanted to confess. 2 men had already been imprisoned based on statements related to a crime they did not commit. Both were falsely accused and unjustly convicted. During the investigation, it came to light that 2 young men had admitted to the murder, while the true killer felt remorse for ruining their lives. He believed that the wrongful convictions were a result of police pressure, which he managed to evade. In 1998, this criminal wrote another letter to the prosecutor's office, confessing to the murder of a young girl and providing numerous details that only the actual murderer would know. The letter caught the attention of the governor, leading to the reopening of the case files to investigate the man's claims, as his conscience began to weigh heavily on him. Police started to re-examine all the case materials and discovered many inconsistencies. The story of the murder began in the year of 1988. On the morning of October 24th, around 9:30 a.m., the administrator arrived on Rent Street in Austin, Texas, to check on her employee, Nancy, who had not answered the phone. Nancy was a manager and was supposed to arrive early to prepare the food. Her husband drove her to the restaurant that day at 7:40 a.m. before going to work. According to the restaurant's schedule, Nancy's last contact with the owner was at 8:30 a.m., when she placed an order for ingredients that were running low. However, when the owner called Nancy at 9 a.m. to check if they were ready to open, Nancy did not answer. Her attempts to call back were met with silence. Worried, the owner decided to go to the restaurant, where she found the back door unlocked, water spilled on the floor, and the mixer running. Everything was eerily quiet, and Nancy was nowhere to be seen. The restaurant owner continued to search and found Nancy in the bathroom, surrounded by her own blood. Her head was severely injured, her eyes were glassy and unfocused. Fortunately, she was still alive, but her wrists were tied with her own bra. Panicked, the restaurant owner immediately called an ambulance. The ambulance arrived, found Nancy alive, and rushed her to the hospital, where doctors did everything they could to save her. Unfortunately, her injuries were too severe to save her. After discussing her condition with the doctors, Nancy's family made the heartbreaking decision to remove her life support. They chose to donate her organs, believing that Nancy would support this choice, ultimately helping to save the lives of many others. Forensic experts found that Nancy had been violently raped before she was shot in the back of the head. DNA evidence was collected from the crime scene and sent to the lab for analysis. The lead police believed that the motive for her murder was robbery, as the cash register from the day before was missing. A year earlier, multiple pizzerias in the Austin area had been robbed, but those incidents happened late at night or after closing hours, and there were no injuries, rapes, or murders. The thieves focused solely on stealing cash from the registers and the business's earnings. Nancy's murder was markedly different from previous robberies in the city. The police discovered multiple hair samples throughout the crime scene, including behind the counter and in the restroom. Her clothing was found in the sink of the women's restroom, indicating a struggle had occurred. The police considered 3 possible scenarios. First, Nancy might have forgotten to lock the front doors. Second, she could have known the perpetrator and willingly let him in. Third, he might have had access to the establishment and possessed his own key. Rumors about the murder of the pizza shop employee spread quickly throughout Austin, particularly affecting other Pizza Hut locations in the area. All employees were warned about the potential danger. This horrific incident shocked the community, from the victim's family to all Austin residents. Everyone was desperate to know who could harm Nancy, and the public urged the police to apprehend this perpetrator swiftly. Police investigated whether Nancy had any enemies. However, at just 20 years old, Nancy had no known connections to criminals and had never been in trouble with the law. She was a kind, well-liked person from Fort Worth, Texas, and well-known to the locals. No one expected her to be the victim of such violence. Just before the tragedy, Nancy had been married to Todd DePriest, who worked for the United States Air Force. At the time of her death in July 1987, the couple had a daughter, Sylvia. The employees at the restaurant where Nancy worked were stunned by her murder. They described her as a kind and friendly young woman who was happily married and deeply loved her family, including her husband and daughter. As a manager, Nancy was well respected by her colleagues, who viewed her more as a friend or sister. There were no complaints about her work ethic or leadership. Police first investigated the possibility that the attacker had a key to the restaurant. This led them to consider current and former employees, as all the pizza parlors in the chain had the same key system. This greatly expanded the pool of potential suspects. Police focused on the restaurant owner who discovered Nancy's body, but eventually discovered that everyone had an alibi and that there were no suspicious individuals among the employees. The main suspect initially considered was Nancy's husband Todd, but he had a solid alibi. After dropping Nancy off at work, he went directly to his own job, which ruled him out as a suspect. This left police puzzled about who could have attacked Nancy. Her family insisted she would never open the door to a stranger and always kept her doors locked, suggesting that the attacker was someone she knew. The police faced growing pressure from the local community, which was flooded with complaints and demands for a swift resolution. The public's fear heightened, particularly on November 9th, 2 weeks after the incident, when the restaurant on Rynn Street reopened. Pizza Hut's management instructed employees to monitor customers closely and to report any suspicious behavior immediately. On the same day, restaurant employees contacted the police to report 2 suspicious individuals. It turned out that these men were Christopher Ochoa, 22, and Richard Danziger, 19, who were employees of Pizza Hut at different locations. The security guard noted that they arrived in a car, parked in the lot, sat in a vehicle for a while, and then came inside to order beer. The 2 young men barely spoke and seemed to be examining the pizzeria suspiciously. When the security guard approached them, he was disturbed by their comments about the murder of Nancy. Christopher and Richard asked if there were any suspects in the case and questioned why there was no security present during the incident. The security guard then asked Richard where he was at the time of the crime, and he replied that he had been working at a different Pizza Hut that morning. Richard believes that there are multiple people involved in the case. The 2 men then raise their beer bottles in a toast, which seems odd to the security guard. The security guard then informs his colleagues of this unusual behavior, prompting them to contact the police with their suspicions. The police quickly identify the young men and check their alibis, which are confirmed. They could not have been at the pizza parlor where Nancy worked that morning. The conversation between the young men and the security guard is also revealing. It is possible that the young men were simply afraid for their safety, as they worked at similar establishments, which prompted them to discuss their concerns with the security guard. However, Christopher and Richard were immediately considered the prime suspects. This was likely due to public pressure and the lack of other suspects for the police. They were well suited to the role of the criminals, as they were likely acquaintances of the girls. They also had keys to the restaurant and had a reputation as good people. They did well in college and worked in a pizza parlor to support themselves, so their loved ones refused to believe that they were involved in the murders. A police officer, Sergeant Hector Palenka, joined the investigation. Hector had actually solved all of his cases. However, there were rumors that he could be less than professional and abused his position. Some claimed that he was willing to use the most extreme measures to obtain confessions. According to rumors, Hector repeatedly beat suspects to obtain confessions. While talking to Hector, Richard revealed that he had heard from co-workers that Nancy was shot in the back of the head with a .2-caliber pistol. He also mentioned that there was a girl's blue apron in the sink, which was blocking the drain and causing the restaurant to flood. Although this information spread quickly among the staff, the police officer found it highly significant. From that point on, the officer became convinced that Richard was the murderer. Hector thought that only the killer would know specific details, like the color of the apron, ignoring that all the staff wore the same uniform. However, aside from his suspicions, the police had no real evidence against Richard. Colleagues verified that Richard was working the morning of the murder, so he was soon released despite the suspicions against him. The police met Christopher at a pizza parlor in another part of town and then brought him to the station to discuss the case. Unlike the previous suspect, Christopher faced a much harsher situation. He was interrogated for hours using aggressive tactics. The officers attempted to intimidate him several times and warned him of the possibility of physical harm and the death penalty, which is legal in Texas. During the interrogation, Christopher cried and tried to prove his innocence, but this only seemed to strengthen the officers' resolve. Despite the intense pressure, the boy maintained his innocence and denied any involvement in the crime. The officers threatened to imprison Christopher with the most violent inmates at the Palenka institution, implying he would face sexual violence if he did not confess. In desperation, Christopher asked what he needed to do to avoid this fate. The police insisted that he admit guilt. Overwhelmed by fear and exhaustion, Christopher falsely confessed that his friend Richard had committed murder. The police recorded his statement. Afterward, Christopher was not allowed to leave. He wanted to go home, but instead, he was taken to the hospital for hair, blood, and other sample collections. Then, he was informed that he couldn't be released because he had signed a statement against Richard and was at risk. Christopher was placed in a hotel and was not allowed to leave his room. The next day, he was brought back to the police station, where they stated that they were certain he was involved in Nancy's murder. He was not a witness, but an accomplice. The nightmare begins again. This time, the police demand a confession from Christopher. He is forced to confess on tape. He repeats the story against his friend, which he was beaten into lying about during the first interrogation. Now, the police force him to say that at the time of the attack, he was also near the Pizza Hut where Nancy worked and was waiting in his friend's car. Of course, they are talking about Richard, who allegedly raped the girl, shot her, and stole the money. Christopher is denied a lawyer during the second interrogation. He has not eaten, drank, or slept properly for days. However, even at this stage, they force him to take a lie detector test. He is forced to answer yes or no questions, not knowing that it is all a scam. As a result of this test, the police falsely accused him of failing a polygraph test in order to further threaten him. Next, the police asserted that they believed he was still in the pizzeria during the massacre and actively participated in the crime. They alleged that the reason for the polygraph test was to prove that Richard was the mastermind behind the crime and that Christopher was his accomplice. Despite the police's insistence on his guilt, Christopher maintained his innocence. They then proposed a deal. If he revealed the truth about what happened, he would serve 60 years in prison instead of facing the death penalty. Additionally, Christopher was promised that if he behaved well in prison, he could eventually be released early. However, if he refused to cooperate, he would face the death penalty. Christopher's answers were recorded on a tape recorder. The police focused on getting a statement that suited their needs. They asked Christopher suggestive questions, suggesting how he should answer. During this time, the recording paused. Then, Officer Hector gave Christopher the answer he wanted and the recording continued. This process took a long time, and the exhausted Christopher continued to resist, although weakly, because he was mentally and physically exhausted. The police became angry and threw a chair against the wall. Hector decided to repeat a tactic he had used just a few days earlier. At that time, Hector brought a typewriter and typed up the statement needed to close the case. Christopher simply signed it. After a few hours, Christopher was taken to the county jail. Over the past 24 hours, he had been interrogated for over 20 hours and spent a week in solitary confinement. In reality, he was being held against his will in a hotel room. Somehow, the purported confession made its way to the police. Although it was clearly false, Christopher signed it, allowing the court to use it as a full confession to Nancy's murder. The document claimed that at approximately 7 a.m., Richard and Christopher went to the Pizza Hut. They had a .22 caliber pistol and used a key to enter the restaurant without any trouble. They found Nancy inside alone, tied her up, and attacked her several times. She was then shot once in the back of the head. Before leaving, they turned on the water to flood the restaurant and destroy the evidence. The day after his forced confession, on November 15th, Richard was arrested while visiting relatives. He was charged with murder and faced the death penalty. After his arrest, the police informed him that they had solved a brutal crime, claiming that the public could now feel safe. Police Hector and others pressured Christopher to give a statement, claiming that they had enough evidence to proceed with the charges. However, the only evidence they actually had was Christopher's confession, which was obtained through torture and psychological pressure. On November 21st, Richard's lawyer, hired by his family, worked hard to argue that the police had illegally obtained a confession. Afterwards, the prosecution began discussing DNA tests, which they claimed matched samples found at the crime scene. The analysis indicated that Christopher could not be ruled out as a potential source of the biological materials found on the Nancy's body. However, the test results did not prove his involvement. It's important to note that the accuracy of DNA testing in the 1980s was much lower than it is today. This meant that expert opinions at the time could not effectively establish guilt. Despite this, the evidence was still presented in the case. Richard maintained his innocence and struggled to understand why his friend Christopher testified against him. The prosecution claimed that a hair found in the pizzeria matched Richard's hair. However, the investigation's findings were inconclusive. The analysis concluded that the material collected was not a follicle, which also indicated that the reliability of the test was very low. The phrasing used in the report was identical to that for Christopher. While Richard could still be considered a potential owner of the found materials, it couldn't be definitively stated that they belonged to him, especially given the low accuracy of the results. This data strengthened the prosecution's argument. Ultimately, the Supreme Court's decision relied heavily on how the prosecutor presented their case. The troubles for the young men do not end there. Christopher's family cannot afford a lawyer, so Christopher is assigned a public defender. Christopher asserts in his defense that his confession was obtained under intense moral pressure from the police, which he finds intolerable. Unfortunately, the lawyer chooses not to investigate this complaint. Instead of defending Christopher's rights, he claims that the only way to avoid the death penalty is to plead guilty. Christopher is asked to testify against Richard. Surprisingly, the lawyer shows little interest in defending Richard and quickly aligns with the prosecution. He is so certain of Richard's guilt that he opposes the investigation and questions the forensic evidence. In a discussion with Christoph, the defense even mentions a witness who claims to have seen Richard at the crime scene, adding to the list of false accusations. Furthermore, the attorney reported that Christopher's fingerprints were found on the murder weapon, so he threatened his client. In fact, the prosecutor's office did not find a gun at all. On April 6, 1989, Richard was charged with armed robbery and rape. For this crime, he could have faced a sentence of 5 to 99 years in prison. However, Christopher believed that the prosecution had shifted its focus and now considered Christopher the murderer, claiming that he had shot Nancy. In fact, the prosecution had enough evidence to convict Richard of murder. At his trial on May 5 of that year, Christopher followed his attorney's advice and pleaded guilty to first-degree murder. His cooperation resulted in a life sentence, avoiding the death penalty. Richard's trial started on January 22, 1990, and it attracted significant public attention. The courtroom was filled to capacity, creating an intense atmosphere where attendees seemed eager for immediate justice against the defendants. They were brought to court wearing bulletproof vests due to concerns over potential violence. After hearing the testimonies, the jury deliberated for just 7 minutes before finding Richard guilty of rape and related charges, resulting in a life sentence. Nancy's family expressed satisfaction with the verdict. Over a year later, it was revealed that Richard was wrongfully convicted for a crime he did not commit. During this time, he had been the victim of a brutal attack, where he was severely beaten and suffered a serious head injury that required part of his brain to be removed. Although Richard survived, he was left disabled for life. At 22, he was moved to a specialized care facility where he received 24-hour assistance, as he was no longer able to care for himself. On that significant day, the leadership of the Austin police focused on Detective Hector Palanca. It became clear that he was abusing his powers systematically, as confirmed by other department employees. There was even video evidence of Hector torturing and physically abusing a suspect to force confessions. As a result, he was initially removed from his position. However, he was later reinstated and continued to harass both guilty and innocent individuals for many years. The damage caused by Hector to the law enforcement system is hard to comprehend. One case alone led to an innocent young man being sentenced to life in prison, while another victim was left permanently disabled. Shockingly, their cases remained unexamined until 1998. The Nancy DePriest case was long considered resolved, and no one had revisited it. This situation changed when Akeem Marina stepped in and sent a letter of confession to the governor, requesting that he reach out to the lawyers. Akeem's letter to the governor's office provided information that could help the police gather physical evidence. He claimed that the handcuffs and bag used in the attack could be found at his parents' home. In addition, the gun that shot Nancy had been confiscated during his arrest for other crimes. The police eventually took the letter seriously and began investigating the case. After reviewing the information, the police were able to confirm the criminal's claims. With more evidence in the archives, they approached Christopher, who was serving a sentence in prison. At first, Christopher was skeptical about the police visit and thought they might be trying to frame him for another crime. As a result, he chose to stick to the false story he had previously confessed to, a story influenced by Officer Hector, and did not provide any useful information. Eventually, Christopher discovered that the police wanted to talk to him because of a letter from Akeem, in which Akeem had confessed to the crime. This news gave Christopher hope that he could prove his innocence and possibly be released. However, He no longer had faith in the justice system. In June 1999, he contacted a project called Innocence. In his letter, he explained his situation, and when activists from the project contacted the police, the district attorney reviewed the case documents. In August 2000, DNA samples were taken from Akeem, whose conscience was tormenting him. Multiple tests were conducted, the results of which clearly showed that Akeem had indeed raped Nancy, and that Christopher and Richard had absolutely nothing to do with the crime. A ballistics test confirmed that the shot that killed Nancy had been fired from the gun confiscated from Akeem. This news shocked everyone, including Nancy's family. Officer Hector Palenka was fired from the police force and retired, and it was eventually decided that the case would be re-examined. On January 16, 2001, a Texas court overturned the convictions of Christopher and Richard, whose lives had been irreparably damaged. In court, Nancy's mother sat next to Christopher's mother, holding her hand. During the trial, Christopher admitted that under pressure from Hector Palenka, he broke down and confessed to a crime he did not commit, dragging his friend Richard into the lie. Akeem, the author of the letter, testified at trial. He claimed that he killed Nancy because he was driven to human sacrifice by voices in his head. He admitted to stealing a work uniform from another restaurant and wearing it the day he knocked on the door of the Pizza Hut where Nancy worked. Believing that he was a co-worker from the same restaurant chain coming to her aid, she opened the door without fear, where he then pointed a gun at her. He demanded money and took her into the bathroom, where he raped and killed her. Akeem testified that during the attack, he pulled out a gun and pointed it at the back of her head. According to his confession, he raped her 8 times before shooting her. During the trial, Akeem revealed that he had heard voices since childhood, but they completely disappeared when he converted to Christianity while in prison. He expressed a strong desire to atone for his sins and confessed to the crime. The prosecutor's office initially wanted him to face the death penalty but eventually asked for life in prison. The judge agreed, and Akeem received 3 life sentences. An investigation was then launched into the 3 police officers who questioned Christopher and Richard, but they faced no significant consequences. Christopher and Richard were eventually found not guilty, and their convictions were overturned, leading to their release. Their families were in disbelief. Christopher shared that he often cried at night in prison, unable to understand why he was there. Both men consistently claimed their innocence, yet no one believed them. The families of Christopher and Richard were furious about the unfair 12-year sentences, which had shattered their lives. Lawyers for the wrongfully convicted filed lawsuits, resulting in financial settlements. Richard received a total of $10.25 million, $9 million from the city, $1 million from the county, and $250,000 from the state. Christopher was awarded $5.3 million, and out of a sense of guilt, he donated $500,000 to Richard. Unfortunately, Richard's condition could not improve due to the traumatic brain injury he sustained. He required lifelong care and experienced mental health issues, along with partial recovery on the left side of his body. Richard spent his remaining days surrounded by loved ones who cared for him. He passed away from cancer in 2021 at the age of 50. Christopher was released after spending 12 years in prison. He pursued higher education and established a legal practice, offering many free consultations to those in need. Details about his personal life remain unknown. Hello again, true crime fans, we've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Amy Widener. Amy Widener, born in 1973, is the second of 4 children. Her siblings include an older brother, John Paul, and 2 younger sisters, Tiny and Cassie, who are 1 and 4 years younger than Amy. After their parents divorced, Gloria, the children's mother, took on the responsibility of raising the children herself. As their father played no role in raising them, the family lived in a house in Indianapolis, with Amy helping her mother with various household chores, including cooking, cleaning, and caring for her younger sisters. Amy, a bright and cheerful 14-year-old girl, had big dreams of becoming a teacher. However, her life took an unexpected turn when she became pregnant. Afraid to tell her mother, she hid her pregnancy by wearing baggy clothes for over 5 months. As her belly grew, it became harder to hide it, and eventually, her family discovered her secret when she was nearly 6 months pregnant. Gathering all her courage, Amy told her mother, Gloria, and burst into tears. Amy begged her mother not to hate her, but Gloria, though shocked, offered words of comfort and encouragement. Gloria recalls feeling stunned, thinking that this was the worst thing that could happen in her life. However, she had no idea of the even more heartbreaking events that were about to happen. The father of Amy's child was 20-year-old Tony Abercrombie, a friend of her brother. What their family did not know was that Amy and Tony had a secret relationship, with only the two of them knowing about their intimacy. After learning of her daughter's pregnancy, Gloria took control and forbade Amy from seeing Tony. On October 25, 1987, Amy gave birth to a daughter named Emily. Amy started school again just 6 days after giving birth. Her mother, Gloria, strongly supported Amy's return to school by taking care of Emily, allowing Amy to focus on her studies. Gloria also made sure that Amy had time to socialize with friends and live a normal teenage life. As a new mother, Amy remained dedicated to her studies, impressing her teachers with her perseverance. Despite juggling the demands of motherhood, Amy excelled in her studies, continuing to receive praise from her teachers. Amy's family adapted to the new addition, with everyone sharing the care of Emily. Over time, life began to fall into a positive pattern, with Amy overcoming her difficulties. Just when things seemed to be going smoothly, a sudden change turned everything upside down. On November 13, 1989, 16-year-old Amy woke up with a severe sore throat and decided to stay home from school, despite her mother, Gloria, offering to take Emily to a nanny. She kept her 2-year-old daughter, Emily, with her. After breakfast together, Gloria went to work, and Amy's siblings went to school, leaving Amy and Emily alone at home. Gloria tried to contact Amy by phone at 9:30 a.m. but received no response. When she called again a few hours later and still had not heard anything, Gloria became worried. She asked a nearby neighbor to stop by and check on them. The neighbor found the house quiet and unresponsive, prompting Gloria to leave work immediately and go home. When she arrived, she found Emily sitting on the stairs. Gloria called Amy, but received no answer, so she went upstairs. The scene in Amy's bedroom was tragic and shocking. Amy lay motionless and naked on the bed, surrounded by bloodstains. When Gloria realized the urgency of the situation, she quickly called 911. The police arrived and carefully searched Amy's house. At first, they thought someone had tried to break in because several items were missing, including stereo equipment and a graphic equalizer that belonged to Amy's brother, John Paul. Another item missing was a piggy bank from Amy's room, a simple glass jar with about $50 in savings for school. The police did not find any signs of forced entry. It is likely that the perpetrator entered through an unlocked back door or the front door, which Amy may have opened herself. In Amy's room, the police found key evidence, a bloody handprint on the wall and several strands of hair, likely belonging to the attacker. The medical examiner determined that Amy had been hit in the head with a sharp object, sexually assaulted, and then strangled. Amy's 2-year-old daughter, Emily, may have witnessed these events. Fortunately, Emily was found unharmed. Due to Emily's young age, the police attempted to communicate with her and gather any information she had. To create a more comfortable environment, they used finger puppets to gently question Emily about the events. During the interaction, Emily mentioned that her mother seemed very angry that day. Unfortunately, Emily did not provide any further details. To aid in their investigation, the police collected evidence, including a section of the wall with the attacker's bloody handprint, as well as the victim's clothing and bedding at the crime scene. During the investigation of Amy's case, the police spoke to her family, friends, and neighbors to gather information. One of the people they interviewed was Amy's 17-year-old brother, John Paul. Police initially suspected him, but he had an alibi and no evidence linking him to the case. Another person of interest was Tony Abercrombie, Amy's ex-boyfriend and the father of her child. He denied any involvement in her murder and expressed his deep feelings for Amy. Tony had a credible alibi at the time of the murder. Police also investigated Troy Jackson, who lived next door to Amy. Although he claimed he had nothing to do with the murder, he knew that a stereo system had been stolen on the day of the murder. Troy had no bruises or scratches on his hands, and a hair sample did not match the hair found at the crime scene. Troy also passed a lie detector test, which eventually cleared him as a suspect. Police expanded their investigation by talking to other acquaintances, neighbors, and classmates of Amy. They collected fingerprints and hair samples from these people, but no evidence pointed to any of them. A large crowd attended Amy Widener's funeral, and police attended the funeral, observing the proceedings and looking for potential clues in the case. Months passed after Amy's death, and the police still had no leads on any suspects. Gloria Widener, Amy's mother, adopted her niece Emily. As the family grieved their loss, Gloria feared for their safety, as the killer had not been caught. Fearing for her children's safety, she considered moving to a new home, but financial constraints made this impossible, forcing them to face their fears in their current home. Amy's friends were now haunted by the fear that they might be the attacker's next target. To feel safer, many of them asked their parents to take precautions and improve the security of their homes. Some even went so far as to board up their windows to protect against potential attacks. One day, when Gloria returned home after a normal day, she expected to find her daughters home from school. However, she was met with an eerie silence when she entered the house. The house was eerily empty, but her daughters' shoes were in their usual place near the door. Horrifying thoughts filled Gloria's mind as she climbed the stairs, fearing another disaster. She stood frozen in her bedroom doorway. Gloria took a deep breath and pushed the door open, finding her children simply asleep, and she breathed a sigh of relief. Occasionally, the police would visit Amy's family, inadvertently forcing them to relive the pain of that terrible day. The constant reminders of the past eventually became unbearable for Gloria. All she wanted was for the police to leave her family alone and stop stirring up memories that would never bring Amy back. In 1989, Amy was murdered and the case went cold. 13 years later, a shocking development occurred when a 29-year-old man contacted the Indianapolis Police Department claiming that he had had a dream in which Amy provided information about her death. Although he provided details about the murder, most of the information was released in news reports. Police investigated the man, who was 16 at the time of the incident and lived across the street from Amy's house. His fingerprints and DNA were tested for any potential connection, but no match was found, leading to his release. Although his call did not contribute significant evidence, it prompted police to re-examine the unsolved case. In 2002, the investigation resumed, focusing on some of Amy's friends and acquaintances. Despite renewed efforts, the investigation once again hit a dead end, leaving the case unsolved. 8 years later, a Facebook group called Remembering Amy was created by her friends, sparking renewed interest in solving the case. A police officer, unfamiliar with Facebook, asked his colleague, Officer Bill Carter, to help him print out information from a Facebook group related to a cold case. Although Bill specializes in crimes other than homicide, reviewing the details of the case piqued his interest in Amy's murder. In his spare time, he began to explore the case files. Bill scrutinized the 2-decade-old case, re-examining every detail in the file, re-evaluating the evidence, and reviewing Amy's school records from the day of the murder. He also looked at the list of people who had attended Amy's funeral. By entering the case information into the database, Bill found some overlooked leads. Among them were several friends of Amy's brother who had never been questioned by the police and had not provided DNA samples. In 2011, Officer Bill expanded his investigation by contacting Amy's family and friends, asking for potential leads and the names of people who might have information about the case. As part of his new approach, he also began collecting DNA samples from people who had not previously been considered during the initial investigation. This effort complemented the neighborhood survey conducted after the crime, where police recorded the names of residents who lived near Amy's home. Bill reviewed the case file and returned to the area to determine if any of the original residents still lived nearby. His investigation led him to a woman who was a neighbor and friend of Amy's. The woman tried to recall the names of the boys Amy had befriended, and while she mentioned some names that the police knew, she also mentioned an unfamiliar name, Rodney Dank. In 2012, Bill received permission from the Cold Case Unit to officially take over the Amy case. His first step was to locate Rodney Dank to determine if he was a potential suspect. Amy's family was familiar with Rodney, as he was friends with Amy's brother, John Paul. They spent time together doing activities like biking and fishing. Bill asked John Paul about Rodney and learned that Rodney was a quiet, reserved person who kept to himself and did not arouse any suspicion. To gather more information, Bill went to the home of Rodney Dank, 40, who lived with his mother near Amy's family. Rodney worked at an auto parts store and had been divorced for some time, with an adult son whom he rarely saw. When Bill arrived at Rodney's home, his mother answered and told the police that Rodney was at work. Bill left his business card, asking Rodney to call him as soon as he returned. Rodney called Bill that evening and the police asked to meet with him to discuss Amy's murder. Rodney agreed and allowed Bill to come to his home. However, when Bill returned to Rodney's home, he was not there. Bill decided to run a background check on Rodney and discovered that Rodney had been convicted of assault in 1991 and burglary in 1997. The police also compared Rodney's fingerprints, which were already in the system, to the fingerprints found at Amy's house during the initial investigation. The test was conducted to determine if Rodney was involved in the case. When the results came back, they discovered that Rodney's fingerprints matched the bloody fingerprints found at the crime scene. After 23 years, Rodney was identified as the killer, but he had disappeared from the house. The police launched an extensive search. They tracked Rodney's credit card activity, which showed a rental car with an OnStar tracking system. The police located the car in Indianapolis, where Rodney was hiding at a friend's house. When surrounded by police, Rodney brandished a knife and claimed his innocence, injuring himself. He attempted to attack the police but was subdued with a taser, handcuffed, and taken to hospital. During a 2-day hospital interrogation that was captured on camera, Rodney confessed to Amy's murder. He said his original intention was to rob, not anticipating Amy's presence due to her illness. Rodney described entering the house through a sliding glass door, where he was suddenly confronted by a panicked Amy. In his panic, he grabbed the nearest object and hit Amy in the head, killing her. As he recounted the events of the next 2 days, Rodney repeatedly mentioned that his memory of the incident was hazy, blaming the 23 years that had passed since the crime. Rodney's account of his actions was inconsistent and he initially mentioned visiting Amy's house with someone called Bag. However, he could not recall many details about this person, including their appearance. When asked about Emily, Rodney stated that he did not see her during the incident and did not know that she was in the house or that she had called for help. Throughout the interrogation, Rodney remained calm. Rodney's DNA was collected and matched with semen found on Amy's bedsheets and blankets in 1989. Fingerprints and semen found at the crime scene were both confirmed to be Rodney's, with no indication that anyone else was involved. When Rodney was revealed as the killer, Amy's family was shocked. They were baffled how Rodney, who was quiet and unassuming, could have committed such a crime. Rodney was friends with Amy's brother John Paul and often visited their home, which was across the street from his. Even more remarkable was that Rodney attended Amy's funeral, where he mourned her death and offered his condolences to her mother, Gloria. Police bill later found Rodney's signature in Amy's funeral book, a detail that had previously been overlooked. Reinvestigating the case led Bill to a crucial discovery. Rodney's name was first mentioned by Tony, Amy's ex-boyfriend and Emily's biological father, in 2003. Tony revealed that Rodney had frequently visited Amy's family home. Bill realized that Rodney had somehow escaped notice in 1989 and had never been suspected or questioned at the time. Further investigation into Rodney's background in 2012 uncovered a disturbing fact. His biological son, Dylan, was in prison for a crime committed in 2009. Dylan was 16 when he killed his biological mother, Mary McHenry. He claimed that he had acted in response to her abuse, using a baseball bat to inflict the fatal wounds. Mary died of her injuries. Dylan turned 17 just days after the incident, leaving behind a tragic and heartbreaking case. Despite being largely absent from Dylan's life due to his early divorce from Mary McHenry, Rodney attended Dylan's trial in 2009, opting for a plea deal that resulted in a 20-year prison sentence. By the time of his scheduled release in 2029, Dylan will be 37. Rodney, on the other hand, initially insisted that he had an accomplice in Amy's murder, a man he knew as Bag. However, in June 2013, just 10 days before his trial was due to begin, Rodney, then 42, recanted his earlier confession, admitting that he had acted alone in Amy's murder. Rodney's sudden confession, combined with the substantial evidence against him, led to his 65-year prison sentence in 2013. Amy's family held a meeting with Detective Bill Carter after Amy's case was solved. To mark the 24th anniversary of her death, they released 24 balloons into the air, expressing their gratitude for Detective Bill's crucial role in solving the case. The family thanked him for his efforts, especially for identifying Rodney as the killer after just 12 days of investigation. Police officer Bill Carter received a prestigious award from the Indianapolis Police Department in January 2014. Although he was offered a position in the Homicide Bureau, he chose to stay in his current position. Years later, Amy's daughter, Emily, has grown up. She graduated from her mother's alma mater and then went to college, looking for new opportunities. Eventually, Emily moved from Indianapolis to California. Gloria still lives in the house where her daughter, Amy, tragically died. She has kept Amy's room as a memory of her, with photos still on display. Now, the room is also where Gloria's grandchildren play when they visit for the holidays, bringing joy and new life to a space once filled with sadness and loss. Hi everyone, thanks for returning. Let's unravel another perplexing mystery. The case of Jasmine Richardson. The Richardson family was widely admired for their friendly and hospitable personalities, which made everyone feel at home. Deborah, Mark, and their children, Tyler and Jasmine, lived in a cozy home. Their home is frequented by friends, and the family atmosphere is built on the principles of love and respect. However, things took a turn when Jasmine, their 12-year-old daughter, entered puberty. From a calm and obedient girl, she grew into a confident but also impulsive young woman. This new personality led to frequent conflicts with her parents and her academic performance started to decline. Jasmine's interests changed in a big way. She switched from listening to modern pop music to heavy rock. In addition, her fashion style is no longer the same as before. Gone were the bright colors and cheerful clothing. Instead, she opted for a darker, more somber style that was often provocative. It was clear that Jasmine was trying to attract the attention of boys, and she began to accentuate the curves of her body. Her interaction with friends noticeably decreased as she began spending more time alone in her room, often with the door closed, glued to her computer screen. After the internet became available at home, her interests shifted to exploring Gothic themes, reading dark poetry, learning about criminal psychology, and studying human anatomy. She also became fascinated with criminal psychology and the Wiccan religion, referring to herself as a witch. She connected with like-minded individuals through websites focused on similar interests, forming a community of friends who shared her passions. Her social media page featured the greeting, "Welcome to my tragic world." Jasmine's behavior, initially thought to be a sign of puberty, but late became more concerning as she began to distance herself from her family. She created a fictional online persona, gave herself a different name, age, and began seeking relationships with people much older than her. Her parents tried their best to support her during this difficult period, suggesting that they spend time together by participating in common activities. However, Jasmine found these suggestions uninteresting. Her relationship with her younger brother deteriorated as she started speaking to him less frequently, viewing him as an annoyance. In stark contrast, she spends hours talking to strangers on social media, building other relationships, to make up for her lackluster relationships with family and friends. Deborah and Mark were aware that their daughter's new hobbies were likely a temporary phase of her youth. As a result, they were patient and allowed her to explore her interests. When Jasmine asked to attend a punk rock concert, her parents agreed. If only they had known the consequences that would follow this outing. In early 2006, Jasmine attended a local concert by a youth band that shared her interests. She also knew that Jeremy Steinke, a boy who had caught her attention for months, would be there. They had met online through a website for vampire enthusiasts and occasionally communicated with each other. Jeremy created an online persona as a 30-year-old werewolf who craved blood. To support this claim, he wore a vial of blood around his neck, but the origin of the fluid was unknown. Despite his ambiguity, he seems to believe he is unique, a quality Jasmine finds appealing and interesting. Jeremy and Jasmine connection deepened after meeting at a concert. Jeremy, however, was 23 years old, and the duo knew her parents would not approve of their relationship due to their significant age difference. As a result, they decided to keep their romance a secret. Complications in Jeremy's life were made worse by problems he had experienced earlier. He struggled financially and resided in a trailer with his mother and sister. His relationship with his mother was strained, largely because of her heavy drinking. This often led to violent arguments with some of her hot-tempered partners, who often abused Jeremy in drunken fits. By the age of 13, Jeremy was struggling academically and had mental health issues due to a troubled home life. He became so overwhelmed that he tried to hang himself, but fortunately, someone intervened in time. He was later diagnosed with depression and hyperactivity. Due to the relentless bullying he faced at school, Jeremy decided to stop attending. As Jeremy navigated the dark period of his life, he developed a passion for the concept of live immortally and began exploring online forums, where like-minded people shared thoughts and ideas. His online profile was filled with morbid topics, including self-harm, pain, and violence. Unbeknownst to their families, Jeremy had started a dating relationship with Jasmine. Their friends were aware of the relationship, but they found it strange due to the large age gap. Everything remained a secret until Jasmine's parents, Deborah and Mark, discovered her excessive internet use and decided to monitor her online activity. What they found alarmed them. Jasmine was in contact with strangers, including Jeremy. He is someone with a suspicious online identity. His nickname, Soul Eater, and interests in dark themes raised concerns, leading Jasmine's parents to intervene and restrict her access to the computer. They were shocked to learn that Jasmine was in a dating relationship with Jeremy, making it clear to them that this relationship was not acceptable under any circumstances. Deborah and Mark took their daughter Jasmine to see a psychologist, hoping she would get the help she needed to escape her toxic relationship. The counseling sessions greatly improved their parent-child relationship, and Jasmine appeared to be returning to a normal life, claiming the past was behind her. She regained access to her computer. Unfortunately, this turned out to be a wrong decision and proved fatal for Jasmine's family. On the evening of Saturday, April 22, 2006, as the family prepared for bed, Deborah heard a noise in the basement and went to investigate. She initially thought the noise might be rats but discovered a person wearing a ski mask instead. The masked man stood opposite Deborah, and her first reaction was to scream. The stranger attempted to silence her by covering her mouth but was unsuccessful, prompting Deborah to scream even louder. The assailant then stabbed Deborah in the chest with a knife, twice. Mark, hearing his wife's desperate cries for help, rushed down to the basement. He was met with a horrific scene. His wife lay in a pool of blood, with the attacker standing nearby. Mark quickly responded by attacking the intruder. However, he was stabbed in the stomach and sustained additional stab wounds. As Mark's pain began to subside and he was losing consciousness, he quietly asked the attacker why he did that. The attacker coldly replied that it was because Mark's daughter had wanted it that way. Upstairs, Tyler was left alone and scared as the attacker approached. Tyler was still in his pajamas and was paralyzed with fear. The footsteps grew louder and the bedroom door opened. Just a few days before the murder, Jasmine was happy since her parents had forgiven her, allowing her to reconnect with them. Mobile phones weren't widely used at that time, so Jasmine used the computer to communicate with the outside world. As soon as she regained internet access, she immediately contacted Jeremy. She told Jeremy, "Everyone will think you and I are crazy, but there's one way we can be together, if my parents disappear." However, what Jasmine didn't reveal to her parents was that she was secretly forming a plan to kill them while she was receiving therapy sessions. She shared this plan with Jeremy. He found the idea appealing, but he stressed that everything needed to be carefully, meticulously planned and that attention to detail was required. Jasmine realized that as long as her parents were alive, she would never be able to be with Jeremy. During this time, Jasmine's friends noticed that she often complained about her parents, expressing her annoyance towards them. What they don't realize is that Jasmine's resentment eventually leads her to want to end her parents' lives. Despite her frequent comments about killing her parents, but her friends considered it just a funny joke. Garrett crossed the street to his friend Tyler's house on Saturday, April 22, in 2006. He was excited to play, as the weather was pleasant. When he arrived at the Tyler's house, he noticed that the blinds were still closed, which seemed unusual. Even more unusual was that no one came to the door when he knocked. This surprised Garrett, as the Mark's car was parked in the driveway. Curious and hoping to find someone, Garrett peeked through the living room window but didn't see anyone. He then walked to the back of the house, towards the basement area where he often played with Tyler. As he looked through the window, he saw something strange on the floor, what appeared to be two people lying in a pool of blood. This disturbing discovery prompted Garrett to inform his mother. Garrett's mother seemed suspicious at first but decided to check on Tyler's family. They approached the house together, and Garrett pointed to the window he had looked through earlier. The woman peeked inside and was met with a horrific sight, immediately prompting her to call emergency services. "There's been an incident at the Jasmine's house," she reported. The police swiftly arrived at the scene and forcibly entered the house through the front door. They then proceeded to the basement. Due to the severity of their injuries and the large amount of blood, the police initially struggled to identify the bodies. However, despite the difficulties, they were eventually able to confirm that the victims were Mark and Deborah, and tragically, they had lost their lives. The crime scene was exceptionally horrific, with blood splatters covering the floor, walls, and ceiling. Later, during a thorough search of the house, the police found a young child in the upstairs bedroom. The boy was lying in bed, surrounded by toys also splattered with blood, and had visible knife wounds. A young boy's throat had been severely cut. As police searched the house, they realized that the Mark and Deborah's eldest daughter, Jasmine, was missing. This raised concerns for her safety. Initial investigations suggested that the attack occurred in the basement and the child's room, with the rest of the house appearing untouched. The condition of the boy's body indicated that the crime likely took place the previous night. It seemed that the perpetrator had broken into the house and attacked the boy and his parents. But what had happened to Jasmine, and where was she? The police developed several theories to explain her disappearance. One possibility was that she had managed to escape and was somewhere safe. Another possibility was that the perpetrator had taken her and was harming her. However, as the investigation continued, no clear answers emerged. Detectives turned to the media for assistance in locating the missing girl. Jasmine, hoping she would reach out or someone would come forward with valuable information. The investigation into the crime continued. Investigators interviewed relatives and friends of Mark's family and their colleagues to gather more detailed information about their lives. They sought to determine if the family had any enemies who could be capable of such a heinous act. However, upon further investigation, they learned that Mark's family was well loved and had no enemies. They were a loving family with a strong marriage and positive relationships with their children, except for one exception, their eldest daughter, Jasmine, who had been causing trouble lately. As a result, the media announcements shifted focus. The investigation now sought to locate the eldest daughter, Jasmine, a very suspicious person. The girl may have information about the case or might have been involved in it. Under Canadian law, which prohibits publishing the names of minors, so news outlets started referring to Jasmine Richardson as JR because she was underage at the time. After news of her relationship with Jeremy spread, this couple has become a wanted person by the police. The police initially focused on their friends and acquaintances. However, this line of investigation was ultimately unsuccessful, and the investigation reached a dead end. Police investigation revealed some new information. A few hours after the crime, Jasmine and Jeremy were seen at a restaurant and a party hosted by a friend. A friend noticed that Jasmine was fine, showing no signs of distress or trauma, and she continued to socialize, drink, and have fun. When friends asked how they managed to escape from her parents, Jasmine laughed and replied in a light-hearted manner. Jeremy and she took care of them. However, Jeremy's tone took a darker turn when he nodded in agreement, and then he added that he had cut them up like fish, implying a violent act had occurred. Jasmine's laughter downplayed the severity of the situation, making it seem less significant. The party guests burst out laughing, thinking that the remark was a sick joke. However, they did not realize that it was actually true. The guests' amusement was also verified by a comedian who was present. The police found a detailed plan in Jasmine's school locker, revealing her intentions to harm her family members with the help of her boyfriend. The photos of the suspects were widely circulated, and it is likely that they will be caught soon, as someone is expected to come forward with information about their whereabouts. Eventually, police received a tip and found Jasmine and Jeremy in Leader, Saskatchewan, about 130 kilometers from Medicine Hat. They were found sleeping in a pickup truck and were taken into custody without a struggle. Jasmine and her boyfriend, Jeremy, were questioned individually, with Jasmine being interviewed first. She told investigators that she and Jeremy were deeply in love and that he reciprocated her feelings. However, their relationship was impacted by two main issues: a large age gap and disparate social status. Jasmine claimed that her parents would never have approved of their relationship. According to Jasmine, Jeremy ended the lives of her parents so that they could be together. When detectives inquired about her involvement in the crime, Jasmine denied being present at the time it occurred and stated she had no prior knowledge of the event. After she found out what had happened, she decided to run away with him because her love for Jeremy was so great. Detectives needed to identify the mastermind behind the plot. To get the suspect to cooperate, investigators came up with a clever tactic. They placed an undercover informant in Jeremy's cell, who successfully extracted information from him that contradicted Jasmine's claims. According to Jeremy, the plan to kill Jasmine's parents was actually she's idea. Jeremy was initially hesitant about going along with the plan. However, after realizing his own feelings for Jasmine, he agreed to it. Additionally, Jasmine's parents confiscating her computer as punishment also influenced his decision. Jeremy confessed to the informant. He took care of she parents, Deborah and Mark, while Jasmine took care of her younger brother, Tyler. Jeremy reveals that she desperately begged him to spare Tyler and come to her, and he was happy to get revenge on them all. Following Jeremy's confession, investigators questioned Jasmine using the recorded conversation between them and he as evidence, which left her no choice but to reveal every detail of the crime. She admitted that she stabbed her younger brother, Tyler, stating she didn't want to leave him behind as an orphan. In the following investigation, Jasmine and Jeremy voluntarily shared their social media profiles and passwords. By doing this, investigators were able to look at their private conversations and found thousands of messages that backed up Jeremy's previous claims. It became clear that Jasmine was indeed the mastermind behind the plan. Further investigation also uncovered a disturbing dynamic between Jasmine and Jeremy. Jeremy wrote that Jasmine was the only person who accepted and supported his unusual tastes, helping to alleviate the feelings of isolation he experienced due to not fitting in with societal norms. Fearing that he would lose her, he agreed to help carry out the horrific plan. One of Jeremy's messages contained a chilling passage, exposing his desire for violence. Jeremy wrote that he wanted revenge on Jasmine's parents and was determined to hold them accountable. His intention was to harm them and eventually make them disappear. Jeremy showed his affection for Jasmine in her time of need. However, his friends revealed a disturbing fact. Hours before the incident, Jeremy and his girlfriend had watched the 1994 film Natural Born Killers. This movie tells the story of a couple who brutally murder 9 people. Jeremy's friends stated that after watching the film, he expressed a desire to reenact a similar scenario with his girlfriend, calling it the best love story of all time. Based on the evidence collected, including witness testimony and the suspect's confessions, Jasmine and Jeremy, detectives were able to reconstruct incidents surrounding the crime. This led to the suspects being charged with 3 homicide counts. Jeremy was intoxicated before the incident. Jasmine allowed him into the house and led him to the basement, where he assaulted Deborah, Jasmine's mother. Deborah received 12 stab wounds, with the most severe wound penetrating 12 centimeters into her chest and damaging her heart, which ultimately caused her death. Jeremy then brutally attacked Mark, Jasmine's father, inflicting 24 wounds, 9 of which were on his back. Mark also bled to death on the basement floor. Meanwhile, upstairs Jasmine stabbed her younger brother Tyler 5 times. Then, Jeremy joined her. He coldly slit the boy's throat. Jeremy returned home to clean the blood off himself, while Jasmine took a taxi to a restaurant where they had agreed to meet. Once reunited, they discussed the incident of the night and then went to a party. Jeremy's friend, Casey Lancaster, helped them dispose of the evidence and evade authorities by fleeing to Saskatchewan. The brutality and gruesomeness of their actions are difficult to put into words. Jeremy and Jasmine committed their heinous crimes with ease and without emotion. What is even more disturbing is that during interrogation and detention, neither of them expressed any regret or remorse for their actions. While they were detained, Jeremy and Jasmine wrote letters to each other, referring to themselves as legendary and immortal. In one of these letters, Jeremy submitted a marriage proposal to Jasmine, which she happily accepted. Jasmine and Jeremy's intense relationship fell apart suddenly. As trial began, they blamed each other for their actions. Jasmine was the first to face trial in June 2007. She entered a not guilty plea, claiming that she was in a trance-like state at the time, which left her unable to intervene or stop Jeremy from killing her family. Jasmine also asserted that she only injured her younger brother, and Jeremy was the one who caused her younger brother's death. She made a statement that her conversations with Jeremy about killing her parents were just hypothetical discussions. But Jeremy took them seriously and pressured her into making them a reality. Jasmine received a 10 years prison sentence for 3 counts of homicide. However, due to Canadian laws regarding juvenile offenders, this was the maximum sentence she could receive, as she was under 14 years old at the time of the crime. The primary goal of the sentence was to focus on healing and restoring the girl's mental well-being, rather than punishing her. In a 10-prison sentence, including 4 years in a psychiatric facility. During her stay, doctors diagnosed her with 2 conditions: conduct disorder and oppositional defiant disorder. Jasmine showed genuine remorse for her actions in the years leading up to her release, which was noted by medical professionals during her community supervision. After serving her full sentence, Jasmine was released from prison in 2016 and has since been living in Canada under a new, protected identity. Her return to society has been met with mixed opinions, with some people supporting her right to a second chance, while others believe her punishment should have been more severe. The community in Medicine Hat has made it clear they do not want her to return. It remains to be seen whether Jasmine has truly changed and grown during her time in detention. Jeremy's trial began in 2008. He claimed that he had not initially intended to harm his girlfriend's parents, Deborah and Mark. However, after being discovered in the basement, he felt forced to attack. Jeremy denied harming Tyler and instead suggested that Jasmine was the one responsible. His defense argued that Jasmine had deliberately manipulated him into committing the crime, as she sought to escape her parents' strict control. Friends of Jeremy stated that he came to them before the crime. He confided in them his fear of losing Jasmine, to the point where he was willing to do anything to prevent it. Jeremy's lawyers asked the court to reduce the charges to manslaughter, suggesting that he was under the influence of substances at the time of the crime. When questioned by the prosecution about his motives, Jeremy gave an inconsistent response. He stated that when someone finds their soulmate, they will do whatever it takes to keep them. Throughout the trial, Jeremy remained largely unemotional, but broke down in tears when his mother, Jacqueline May, testified in his defense. Jacqueline felt guilty about the role she played in his upbringing, during which he was frequently physically and emotionally abused by her partners. In the end, Jeremy was found guilty of 3 counts of first-degree homicide and received 3 life sentences. He will be eligible for parole in 25 years, starting in 2033. Casey Lancaster's charges related to being an accomplice in a crime have been dismissed in a Medicine Hat court. However, she was found guilty of obstructing justice. As a result, she received a 1-year sentence of house arrest and was prohibited from using drugs and alcohol during her custody. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Judy Blake Morlannon. Judy Blake was born on October 16, 1957, in Hancock, Michigan, into a conservative family. As the only daughter, Judy was loved dearly by her parents and 2 older brothers. Her parents, Dale and Marianne, were active members of the Redeemer Free Lutheran Church and also ran a successful business called Dale Service. Through this, they provided Judy with a comfortable life in a warm environment. In 1974, Judy met Bruce Morlanen. Both worked in the healthcare industry, with Judy as a nurse and Bruce as a support worker. The age difference was only 3 years, yet the two were complete opposites. While Judy was shy and gentle, Bruce was outgoing and confident. Judy's family was a little apprehensive about Bruce, but love helped Judy and Bruce convince their families, and they got married in 1978. In the following years, Judy's family tried to accept and make Bruce an integral part of her life. It seemed to work because Bruce got along well with Judy's family. Another happy turning point came in 1989 when Judy gave birth to their daughter, Elise. However, the joy and peace in their family life were short-lived. On November 29, 1992, after Thanksgiving, Judy and Bruce visited Judy's family and brought Elise with them. It was also the last day of hunting season in the Upper Peninsula. Bruce and Judy's brothers went into the nearby woods to hunt deer on Sunday morning, while Judy stayed at home with her mother and Elise. Judy took her Springer Spaniel and her parents' dog, Streak, for a walk in the woods behind the Blake home on Highway 38 in Ontonagon County, Michigan. When Judy's mother, Mary Ann, said goodbye to her daughter, she had no idea it would be the last time she would see her. 2.5 hours passed without Judy, and Mary Ann became worried. Although Judy was familiar with the woods, the possibility of an accident or trouble was concerning, especially since hunting was still ongoing. A neighbor joined Mary Ann in searching for Judy. As it grew dark, the two women had difficulty following Judy's footprints along the trail. After nearly an hour of searching, Mary Ann came across a terrifying sight. On one of the trails in the woods, Mary Ann saw Judy lying motionless. The dogs were still circling the area. When they tried to turn Judy over, they found a terrible wound and bleeding in her chest, indicating that Judy was no longer alive. When Mary Ann discovered Judy's death, she ran home and reported the incident to the local authorities. Investigators soon determined that Judy had died from a gunshot wound. Although the night was getting colder, the police decided to search the woods with flashlights in hand. However, after searching the entire area, they still did not find many clues, including the bullet that killed Judy. However, they did find one important trace, a burn mark on a maple tree. Detective Bob Ball, who was in charge of the case, believed that the burn mark could have been caused by the bullet that killed Judy. He hoped that if the bullet was found, it would shed some light on the case. Forensic tests later confirmed that the burn mark was indeed caused by a bullet. Based on the position of the body in the burn marks, investigators concluded that the bullet struck Judy first, passed through her heart, exited her body through her left side, hit a tree, and eventually landed somewhere in the woods. Initially, the incident was ruled a tragic accident. Investigators believed that a stray bullet from an unknown hunter killed Judy, which was not unusual in the area. However, determining who was responsible for Judy's death was a difficult task, as bullets from high-powered rifles can often travel 3 miles or more. Most of the time, hunters don't realize that their bullets have killed a person. While Judy's body is being taken to the medical examiner's office, the detectives begin interviewing family members. Everyone seems deeply saddened by the tragedy, but an unusual statement from Bruce makes Detective Bob uncomfortable. Bruce criticizes Judy for not being more careful. Bruce becomes a suspect because, in most brutal cases, the person closest to the victim is usually the suspect. However, Detective Bob also knows that Bruce may just be a husband trying to hide his grief. Bruce's brothers claim that Bruce was with them all day, and they are certain that he had nothing to do with Judy's death. They are even unhappy with the police for considering Bruce a suspect. After 2 days, the autopsy report reveals an important detail about the time of death, estimating it at around 3 p.m. When Detective Bob returns to interview Judy's family again with this new information, Bruce's relatives reveal that although Bruce was with them for most of the day, they did not see him at a particular time. Judy's family, however, remains completely convinced of his innocence. They believe the investigation is flawed in accusing a man who is still grieving the loss of his wife. However, they do not know that the detectives have their own reasons for believing that Judy's death was not an accident. By analyzing the trajectory of the bullet and forensic evidence, investigators find that the bullet entered the body at an upward angle. This is a significant finding because if Judy had been shot by a hunter, the bullet would have entered the body at a downward angle. This raises the suspicion that Judy's death was a targeted murder. However, one question remains: was the killer really Bruce? To verify their suspicions, the detectives decide to summon Bruce for a thorough investigation. On December 11, 1992, just 12 days after the investigation began, Bruce is invited to the sheriff's office for a formal interview. After a brief interview with Detective Bob, Bruce recounts in detail where he had been on the day his wife died and provides the names of nearly 30 people who witnessed his presence that day. However, there is a suspicious 30-minute gap in Bruce's itinerary on the day of the incident that he cannot explain. Despite his repeated claims of having nothing to do with his wife's death, this gap causes Detective Bob to begin questioning what Bruce might be hiding. The truth about Bruce's guilt remains unclear, but his behavior raises suspicions. After his wife's death, Bruce does not spend much time on the funeral. Over the following weeks, he goes skiing, hangs out with friends, and even flirts with some of his deceased wife's friends instead of taking care of his daughter. This causes Judy's family to begin suspecting Bruce, although they initially supported him. Bruce's behavior is the cause of this suspicion. The police are actively investigating the case but have not yet found any concrete evidence against him. To gain information, Detective Bob asks some of Bruce's friends and colleagues to secretly follow him and report back to the police if they see anything suspicious. This method of surveillance reveals an important detail. One of the people asked to follow Bruce is Gail, a 35-year-old colleague. She has a remarkable story to tell the detectives about Bruce. Shortly after the funeral, Bruce shows up uninvited at Gail's house, carrying 5 boxes filled with his deceased wife's belongings. After placing the boxes on Gail's porch, Bruce left before Gail could ask for more information. Since it was the holidays, Gail left the boxes outside for a while without paying attention to them. When she opened the boxes, she discovered that most of them were filled with Judy's clothes. But in one of the boxes, under the pile of clothes, Gail found a letter written 6 months earlier and signed by Judy. Finding this letter was a surprise to Gail, as she had only met Judy once. What was even stranger was the content of the letter. The letter began with Judy's request that Gail keep her old clothes as a souvenir, as she believed that Gail was the only person Bruce trusted. The letter then went into many intimate details about Bruce and Judy's marriage, about why they were no longer compatible and were on the verge of divorce. The letter even mentioned that Bruce needed a new girlfriend. The strangest thing about the letter was that the writer ended by praising Bruce's ability in bed. The letter immediately made Gail feel that something was wrong. The detectives felt the same way. To verify the authenticity of the letter, they showed it to forensic examiner James Stegall. He was tasked with comparing the letter to a sample of Judy's handwriting to see if it was really written by Judy. Handwriting analysis revealed that the handwriting in the letter indicated the speed of the writer, appearing slow and deliberate, which could be a sign of forgery. Judy was ruled out as the author of the letter, but it was also impossible to definitively confirm that the handwriting was Bruce's. With no conclusive evidence against Bruce, the detectives had to rely on limited resources to find more information. Detective Bob decided to continue interviewing Gail. Gail revealed that Bruce had been trying to get her attention for a long time, even before Judy's death. However, Gail, who is happily married, only sees Bruce as a nuisance. Bruce constantly flirts, but Gail deliberately ignores him and hopes he will give up. Gail is not the only one who dislikes Bruce. No one has a good word to say about him. At work, he often flirts with other female employees, causing everyone to try to stay away. His colleagues complain that he is difficult to work with. Gail also reveals that after his wife passed away, he bragged about being rich. According to Gail, this was just his attempt to seduce her. This information makes Detective Bob interested in investigating Bruce's marriage. They speculate that Bruce and Judy often quarrel because of Bruce's habit of flirting at work, but it is uncertain whether Judy is aware of Bruce's behavior towards female colleagues at work. However, the detective also discovered that Bruce and Judy's financial problems, caused primarily by Bruce's irresponsibility in overspending, had occurred in the months leading up to Judy's death. Bruce was deeply in debt, and the situation had become so serious that he was forced to borrow money from one place to pay off another. Judy had always managed her finances well throughout the marriage with her income, but she eventually began to resent Bruce, especially when she was given the added responsibility of caring for their daughter. The detectives discovered that a few weeks before Judy's death, Bruce had begun taking out multiple insurance policies in Judy's name, some of which had a double payout clause if Judy died in an accident. Detective Bob wondered if Bruce saw this as an opportunity to solve his financial problems and get out of the marriage with Judy. In fact, after Judy's death, Bruce was due to receive $330,000 from her insurance policies. What made investigators shudder was that in 1991, nearly 14 months before Judy's death, she had suffered a horrific accident. An 85-pound chimney block accidentally fell from the roof where Bruce was working, hitting Judy in the head and nearly killing her. Fortunately, she survived the attack, although she suffered a severe concussion and was hospitalized for several days. In another shocking development, a fire broke out in her house while Judy was sleeping alone. Fortunately, Judy woke up in time, called the fire department, and escaped once again. After these two incidents, Judy was very frightened. Some of Judy's friends told detectives that she had expressed her intention to leave her husband. Although she had a premonition that something was wrong, she stayed for the sake of her daughter. Judy's family was unaware of her feelings. At this point, Detective Bob Ball was almost certain that Bruce had killed his wife and deliberately staged it as a hunting accident, but he lacked physical evidence. He contacted Dan Castle, a metal detector expert who had helped the police many times before. Knowing that the fatal bullet might still be somewhere in the woods, Detective Bob asked Dan Castle to find it. Dan worked with his metal detector every day, but after searching for weeks without finding anything, he had a problem. The snow had covered up all traces of the bullet. Despite the setback, Dan was not ready to give up. He decided to experiment by using a slingshot to recreate the trajectory of the bullet and determine where it might have landed. Luckily, the idea worked. When he searched the area where his marble ricocheted in the snow, he found the bullet about 80 feet from a maple tree. The discovery of the bullet was important, but authorities needed to determine whether it was the bullet that killed Judy or just another bullet fired during hunting season. Ray Kenny, a firearms examiner from the Marquette State Police Crime Lab, was assigned to analyze the bullet. A few days later, he discovered some important details. It was a .30 caliber bullet from a Moss rifle, and it contained wood fibers. Kenny determined that this was the bullet that had hit the tree, but there was more evidence stuck inside. Kenny found a small pink fiber from Judy's shirt and some black fibers from her jacket. Finally, a crucial link was discovered, creating a major breakthrough in the case. Investigators then focused on Bruce's gun collection. They examined all the rifles that could have fired the bullet collected from the scene and identified 4 weapons that could have been involved. Bruce was forced to tell the truth, but he still chose to lie and denied owning any of the rifles. However, his luck ran out when Judy and Bruce's financial records showed a loan document that listed his gun collection as collateral. Detectives also found an asset list that included a gun that Bruce had not declared. It was a rifle with a scope, matching one of the 4 guns that could have fired the bullet. In the end, investigators concluded that the gun was probably the murder weapon. On April 23, 1993, after 5 months of investigation, Bruce agreed to take a polygraph test after many delays and evasions. During the first part of the test, Bruce calmly answered the investigators' questions. However, when the detectives placed Gale's letter in front of him, the interview took a critical turn. For the first time, Bruce changed his story and confessed to killing his wife after months of denial, perhaps because he realized Gale had cooperated with the police or feared that the authorities were finally closing in on him. With tears in his eyes, Bruce revealed that on November 29, 1992, he saw an opportunity to kill his wife. However, he said that the first 2 times he saw Judy from a distance, he aimed but could not shoot. The 3rd time, he closed his eyes, pulled the trigger, and Judy was fatally shot. Bruce explained that his motive for killing Judy was her threat to divorce him, which he did not want to happen. He claimed that Judy was a strict wife both at work and at home, and was not good at cooking. Bruce said that he threw the rifle into a nearby river, but the police could not find it after searching the water. He also pointed out an error in the medical examiner's report. Although the report said Judy was shot on the left side of the chest, Bruce insisted that she was actually shot on the right side and the bullet exited the left side. This detail was crucial to his confession, as only the killer would know this. Bruce was immediately arrested and charged with premeditated murder. Surprisingly, despite his confession, he pleaded not guilty, claiming that the police had coerced him into confessing. Despite the overwhelming evidence against Bruce, prosecutors decided to seek more evidence in preparation for the trial. Investigators reenacted the moving of the chimney, which Bruce had previously said he had accidentally pushed with his foot. However, they discovered that the chimney was too heavy to have been moved accidentally and required a deliberate act to make it fall. With dozens of witnesses and a wealth of evidence, the trial swung in favor of the prosecution. During this time, Bruce barely moved but burst into tears when Gale took the stand to testify. The defense, on the other hand, had no witnesses to testify. Bruce's attorney, Thomas Castleman, said all of their witnesses refused to appear out of fear. He called the investigation a witch hunt and accused the police of improperly obtaining confessions. As expected, the jury did not believe Bruce's story, and on December 15, 1993, they returned a guilty verdict. On January 21, 1994, Bruce Moylanen was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The sentence brought comfort to Judy's family. After the tragedy, Judy's brother and sister-in-law, David and Yvonne Blake, adopted 5-year-old Elise. Hello, crime enthusiasts. Are you ready for another chilling investigation? The case of Jane Hilton. Jane was a familiar face in El Dorado Hills, California. She wrote for the Foothill Times and often reported on local social events. Jane had 6 children, whom she loved dearly and often inspired through her daily poetry. After earning her real estate license, she married Archie Hilton in 1984, but the marriage fell apart in July 1985. Seeking help, Jane approached her former boss, Will McLean, who owned a large house in El Dorado Hills. Will's daughter, Maureen Klein, lived there with her boyfriend. Will's nephew, Ricky Davis, and his girlfriend, Connie Dahl, were also staying in another room in the house. On July 6, 1985, Will invited Jane and his youngest daughter, Autumn Anchor, to live in his house. Will's house was crowded and had a lot of people coming and going. However, Jane and Autumn's first night there would be their last. At 3:30 a.m., Ricky Davis, 20, and his girlfriend Connie Dahl, 19, returned from a party and found Autumn wandering around outside. Autumn said she had been attacked and feared her mother would be angry. The three of them then went inside, where they found traces of blood in the hallway. When they entered the first room, which belonged to Ricky's mother, Maureen, the air became quiet. On the bed, they found the bloody body of Jane Hilton. She had stopped breathing. Because Maureen and her boyfriend were away on a camping trip and were not home at the time, Ricky and Connie called 911. Paramedics and police arrived at the scene, but Jane was pronounced dead at the scene. She had been stabbed 29 times, beaten, and bitten on the shoulder. This senseless murder led investigators to begin questioning those closest to Jane. Archie Hilton, Jane's estranged husband, was at the top of the list of suspects. He was interviewed and provided a solid alibi, including DNA. Initially, Archie Hilton was the logical choice because their marriage was in trouble. However, he said that although they were having some difficulties, there was no sign that he and Jane were going to divorce. When Ricky Davis and Connie Dahl were interviewed, they both said that they came home early in the morning and found Autumn waiting outside. When they entered the house, they found the hallway carpet soaked in blood. The blood trail led them to the master bedroom, where they found Jane lying dead on the bloody mattress. The details and physical evidence in the case were scant, and the potential suspects all had alibis. The case gradually went cold. The cold case was reopened in 1999, and El Dorado County Sheriff's Department detectives Richard Strasser and Rick Fitzgerald were assigned to investigate. After a thorough review of the case file, they focused on a newspaper article about Connie Dahl, Ricky Davis's ex-girlfriend and Jane Hilton's roommate. In the article, Connie described the position of Jane's body when she was found, lying on the bed, as if someone had placed her in her usual sleeping position. However, this testimony contradicted Ricky Davis's earlier statement. Ricky had said on the recording that the body was found on the floor. But at the time, detectives thought they heard Ricky say that, but they weren't sure. Detectives questioned Connie for 3 hours. At first, she stuck to her story. But over the next 18 months, Connie was questioned 4 times. Each time, the detectives used techniques known to increase the likelihood of a false confession. They accused Connie of her role in the murder, and she was threatened with being charged with murder. As a result, Connie cooperated with the detectives, even though she had no actual role in the case. She was convicted of manslaughter and only served 1 year in prison. Detective Strasser and Fitzgerald lied to Connie, telling her that they would use DNA evidence to identify a suspect. In fact, no DNA evidence was collected or tested in this case. Instead, the investigators used crime scene photos and real events, such as the bite mark on Jane's shoulder, to provide information to Connie and guide her to recall events the way they wanted. Over the course of 4 interviews, Connie began to lose control and recall events from the case. However, this also allowed her to create a completely different story about the night of the murder, based on what she remembered and what investigators gave her. Connie Dahl gave conflicting accounts of Jane Hilton's murder. In one interview, she claimed that Autumn Anker was present at the crime scene and was shot. In another interview, she admitted that she may have bitten Jane's shoulder. Connie also claimed that the murder began with an argument between Ricky Davis and Jane, which stemmed from Ricky's desire for Autumn to join them at a party, which Jane refused. Despite changing her story to fit the facts, Connie could not recall the murder weapon or where it was hidden. However, she implicated her ex-boyfriend Ricky Davis in the case, making him the prime suspect. Following Connie's confession, detectives interviewed Ricky Davis and Autumn Anker. Both stuck to their original accounts of the case. The detectives attempted to deceive Ricky by telling him that Autumn had also implicated him in the murder, but he did not change his story. Autumn told the detectives that she had no reason to protect Ricky and would not be swayed by threats of charges. Despite using coercive interrogation techniques, the detectives were unable to get Ricky or Autumn to change their statements. Therefore, they used Connie's confession to arrest Ricky. Connie accepted a plea bargain, agreeing to testify against Ricky in exchange for a reduced sentence. At Ricky's first trial, the jury was unable to reach a verdict, leading to a retrial. However, at his second trial in 2005, the jury found him guilty. During the trial, Connie took the stand and testified against Ricky. She explained that she had wrestled with Jane and accidentally bit her shoulder. Connie then walked out, leaving Ricky alone with Jane. Once outside, she heard Jane screaming, pleading, and gagging as Ricky continued to assault her. Ricky was sentenced to 16 years in prison for second-degree murder, largely based on Connie's testimony. Connie, on the other hand, received a reduced sentence of manslaughter and a 1-year sentence in county jail. Unfortunately, she died of a drug overdose in 2014. Despite his conviction, Ricky maintained his innocence. In 2006, he contacted the Northern California Innocence Project, NCIP, for help in proving his innocence. NCIP, a nonprofit founded in 2001 by Kathleen Rodolphi and Linda Starr, provides DNA testing services to convicted prisoners who claim innocence. Ricky's case was reopened in 2006 after he contacted NCIP. NCIP and the El Dorado County District Attorney's Office worked together to retest DNA from the crime scene. The retesting included Hilton's nightgown and biological material found under her fingernails. The retesting uncovered a DNA profile from an unidentified male. This DNA was found on both Hilton's fingernails and nightgown, indicating that they came from the same source. The results cleared Ricky, Connie, and Anchor of any crimes. This also proved that Connie's testimony was false. The DNA test results also proved Archie Hilton innocent, but unfortunately, he had passed away by the time the results were released. The unidentified DNA profile was entered into the FBI's CODIS database, but no matches were found. While the new evidence supports Ricky's claim of innocence, there are still obstacles to overcome. NCIP successfully argued that if the DNA test results had been presented at Ricky's trial, the outcome might have been different. In California, the standard for overturning a conviction typically requires new evidence that clearly establishes innocence. This standard is extremely difficult to meet. An expert on false confessions, Richard Leo, reviewed the transcript of Connie Dahl's interview in 2015. He found that detectives used pressure techniques to force Connie to give a false confession that fit the detectives' preconceived ideas about Jane Hilton's murder. Then, in 2016, the Northern California Innocence Project, NCIP, helped sponsor Senate Bill 1134, which was intended to address these issues. The bill allows wrongfully convicted people like Ricky to prove that new evidence could convince a jury. It was passed in January 2017, after NCIP attorney Melissa O'Connell filed a motion for a new trial based on new DNA evidence. The bill was sponsored by former California State Senator Mark Leno and brings California standards in line with those of 43 other states. In 2019, Superior Court Judge Kenneth Malakian overturned Ricky's 2005 conviction and ordered a new trial. It was originally scheduled to begin in the fall of 2019, but due to the health of his defense attorney, the judge announced the trial would take place in April 2020. However, the trial date changed again. Advances in DNA testing helped Ricky become the first person in California and only the second person in the United States to be exonerated of a crime. A new DNA testing method called genetic genealogy helped achieve this result. Genetic genealogy is a new DNA testing method that involves taking DNA evidence from the crime scene and sending it to genetic companies. These companies then search genealogical databases to find a potential match. In February 2020, the DNA evidence matched a man. In February 2020, El Dorado County District Attorney Vern Pearson announced that a new suspect had been identified in the death of Jane Hilton. The man was identified through DNA evidence collected from the crime scene. Following his arrest, several residents who knew the man revealed his identity to the media. The man is known as Michael Green, a longtime resident of Roseville, California. Michael graduated from Oakmont High School in 1986. According to those who knew him, Michael was a nice and easygoing person. They even described him as very calm and cool. So, a former friend of Michael could not understand why he would commit such a brutal act in El Dorado Hills. Michael was 17 years old at the time of the crime. On the night of July 6, 1985, Jane Hilton's daughter Autumn met Michael and his two friends, Calvin and Stephen, at a park. Autumn then decided to go home to shower and said she would come back to see her friends. However, she went to another friend's house instead of going back to the park. However, that evening, Autumn returned to the park to meet the boys again. What happened next is only speculation. Investigators believe Michael took advantage of the moment to break into Jane's home and was discovered by her. In the struggle to escape, Michael may have attacked Jane in a frenzy. After the attack, Jane's body was discovered by Ricky, Connie, and Autumn when they returned home. Michael had no criminal record before or after the murder. Michael appeared to have lived a normal life until DNA linked him to the gruesome crime. Two other boys who were with Michael were sought shortly after his arrest. One boy, Calvin, had died some time ago. However, another boy, Stephen, was found and questioned the day after the arrest. Stephen is considered a witness, not a participant in the case. Michael was arrested on February 11, 2020. As Michael was a juvenile at the time of the murder, he made his first appearance in juvenile court on February 19, 2020. Michael was then transferred so that he could be tried as an adult. Michael waited 2.5 years before he was tried in court. On July 29, 2022, Michael pleaded no contest. This means that Michael waived his right to a jury trial, and he will face a charge of first-degree murder. He also waived his opportunity to object to the plea. His sentencing date was set for September 27, 2022, with Judge Suzanne Kingsbury presiding. During the sentencing hearing, Dr. Elizabeth Kaufman, a professor of educational psychology, was called to testify about adolescent development. Kaufman's research shows that adolescents have a variety of developmental needs, including emotional and cognitive development. In late adolescence, young people can distinguish between right and wrong, but their ability to control their emotions declines. To provide additional information, the defense called several witnesses from Michael's childhood who had maintained relationships with him into adulthood. When asked about their views of Michael after learning of his confession, all agreed that they were shocked he had committed the murder of Jane Hilton. Those who knew Michael described him as cheerful, well-liked, funny, and lovable, both before and after the murder. Michael's ex-wife, Karen Green, said Mike was not evil at all. After the witnesses finished testifying, each of Jane Hilton's children gave victim impact statements. All described the unforgivable loss Michael had caused their family. Heather Purvis McConnell, Jane Hilton's daughter, said, "The pain that will never go away will always haunt me." Ardith Brandon, Hilton's fourth child, said, "I loved my mother and I think Michael loved her too. I want to know how he would feel or what he would say to the person who stabbed your mother 29 times. What would you do if you got a call in the early morning to tell you your mother was dead?" Ardith recounted collecting her mother's belongings from the house where she was killed and ended with a powerful statement, "We will always have something in common, regret for the stupid decision you made 37 years ago." Hilton's son, Ian, echoed his sister's sentiments. He went on to explain the hardships the family faced and the constant nightmares they endured, especially after being wrongly blamed for her sister Autumn. As he finished, he broke down in tears and said, "All the words we say will never bring my mother back." Autumn was the last to speak. Her testimony showed real pain as she recounted what she had been through over the past 2 decades. She recounted the day 2 detectives came to her home, telling her they had found the people responsible for her mother's death. She was later accused of biting her mother and helping move her body from the floor to the bed. Autumn said that if she had not sought the help of a lawyer at the time, she doesn't know how far the investigators' intimidation tactics could have gone. Deputy District Attorney Jay Linden read a statement on behalf of the family. In the statement, he questioned Michael about why he killed Jane in such a brutal manner. "You hit her. She had multiple injuries around her head and face. You kicked her in the jaw. You bit her shoulder. Why did you do that?" Linden went on to read a statement expressing that Michael did not just kill Jane, he destroyed many lives in the process. Linden then asked Michael if he thought about Jane and who she was. He pointed out her accomplishments and the love she had for each of her children. In her closing argument, Michael's defense attorney, Margaret Husher, emphasized that Michael was not in control of his actions. Margaret argued that Michael did not realize that his actions were wrong because he was a teenager at the time. This argument was based on expert testimony from Dr. Kaufman. She asked the court to consider a reduced sentence, reading various criminal codes and court rules. However, Judge Kingsbury interjected and stated that the court would not consider granting Michael probation, leaving the defense unable to add any further comment. In response, Linden thanked the court and said that the request for probation was an insult. He said it was like a slap in the face to the victim's family, who had suffered for decades. Linden stated that Michael had gotten away with murder for 37 years and that granting him probation would allow him to get away with more. Judge Kingsbury has heard many arguments about juvenile murder cases. In her 26 years as a judge, she said the murder of Jane Hilton was the most brutal. Before sentencing, Kingsbury asked the victim's family to forgive them for the pain they have endured. She also hoped they would overcome their pain, as that was their mother's wish. Kingsbury encouraged Michael Green to use all the resources available to him in the California Department of Rehabilitation. She said Michael could achieve parole if he used those resources. Kingsbury also said Michael had a great side and that he had a lot to offer. She also said he was young enough to be released and live a productive life. Michael Green was sentenced to life in prison and is being held in the El Dorado County Jail. He will then be transferred to the California Department of Rehabilitation. Restitution will be determined after further review by the court. Ricky Davis, who was wrongfully convicted of the murder, was released on February 13, 2020. He will be entitled to more than $750,000 in state compensation. However, his attorney argues that this amount does not make up for the years of freedom he has lost. Ricky continues to sue the state for damages covering the period from May 21, 2002 to February 13, 2020, for a whopping $18 million. The lawsuit is still pending as of 2022. In September 2022, California passed Assembly Bill 2644, which prohibits law enforcement officers from using threats, physical harm, deception, or manipulative interrogation tactics when interrogating people 17 years of age or younger. District Attorney Vern Pearson is calling on all law enforcement agencies to stop using intimidation tactics. He says the deceptive tactics that have been used for years will assume guilt and focus on getting a confession instead of getting the whole story. The El Dorado County DA's office will now dismiss any case where the main evidence is a confession obtained through threats, lies, or psychologically manipulative interrogation tactics. The measures are intended to ensure that no one is convicted based on a false, coerced confession like the one that Ricky Davis made.